Hi, this is Ted Pattison from Critical Path Training. So in this session, I'm going to give you a quick development primer on working with SharePoint Server 2010 and the Microsoft SharePoint Foundation. So some of the things that we're probably used to if we've been working with previous versions of SharePoint is that there is a server-side object model, and the classes that we program against live in Microsoft.SharePoint.dll. Still the same way. So if you're familiar with the set of objects that you see on the screen here, things like the SP Web and the SP Site, and also as SharePoint developers, we had to go through the learning curve and realize that an SP Site is not a site, but instead it's a site collection. When I want to program against a site, it's an SP Web. Now people can get confused as they come in and say, well, wait a second, there's an SP Site collection. Isn't that a site collection? No, that's a collection of site collections. But whether we went through that learning curve in SharePoint 2007 or 2010, many of the classes stay the same. So what we want to do in this session is to just create a simple application and deal with some of the issues, such as the fact that we are 64-bit now only. Let's go to this piece of code that you might remember from an earlier version of SharePoint. Well, what I want to do is I want to write an example just from scratch with a basic console application that does the exact same thing. And what we'll see is there's going to be one or two bumps in the road along the way that we have to work through if we're going to make this work. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and start a demo. I'm going to crank up Visual Studio 2010 and create the simple console application. Okay, so let's start off by looking at a team site. We have this team site right here. And if I go and look at the different lists that exist within it, it's got an announcements list, a calendars list, a links list, a task list. So let's just write a simple console application that is going to allow us to see what lists live inside there. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the URL internetcontoso.com. Now let's go ahead and start up the new version of Visual Studio 2010. Now note that Visual Studio 2010 includes this new powerful set of development tools known as the SharePoint tools. I'm not going to demo those in this session. What I want to do is just create a simple console application and program against Microsoft.SharePoint.dll. So let's go ahead and create a new project. As I create this new project, let's go to Windows, and let's create a console application. And the first thing to keep in mind is that SharePoint 2010 is based on .NET 3.5, not 4.0. So a lot of the Visual Studio 2010 settings, will lead you to creating things that are .NET 4.0, and it won't work. Now, I'm going to go ahead and we'll just create an application called Hello Microsoft SharePoint Foundation, MSF. And so we'll go ahead and we'll create this new application. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to reference Microsoft.SharePoint.dll. So if we say add references, we can look to the built-in references, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that these are sorted here. And if we go down, and looks like the sorting is going to put them down under Microsoft, and there is SharePoint.dll. And so note that this is based on version 2.0 of the runtime. Now, so that means that it's .NET 3.5. So remember that .NET 3.5 and .NET 3.0 all sit on top of .NET 2.0. And ultimately, in Visual Studio 2010, this is going to say either V2 or V4, and that's going to show you whether it's .NET 3.5 or .NET 4.0. So let's go ahead and add a reference inside here. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and add a using statement. So we'll come down here and we'll add the using Microsoft.SharePoint. And now let's go into full screen mode and write some code. Now, first thing we want to do is we have this URL to the site. And so let's go ahead and put that in place right here. Now we've got that. Let's go ahead and create a new SP site object. So we'll say using, SP site. And remember, that's the site collection, so I'll call it SC. And that's going to equal, we'll call new on SP site, and we'll go ahead and we'll put the URL to the site inside there. Now we've done that, we'll go ahead and we want to print out a set of the lists that live inside there. So let's go back and get our site object, SP web. And with this SP web object, looks like I need to come through here, put in one more parenthesis. There's my SP web object. That is the site. That equals, and now we're going to say site collection.root web. Now note that I've put a using construct around the site collection, so dispose is automatically called on it. I'm not going to do the same for the SP web, and the reason for that is that if a site collection gets disposed, all the webs that were opened up on it automatically get disposed. Back in 2003, it was important to call dispose on your SP webs as well as your SP sites, but that's not necessary here. Now, the next thing we'll do, now that we got a hold of our site object, we'll create a for each statement, and we'll say for each, and we'll look at each particular SP list, and we'll look at it in the list collection of the current site. And what we want to do here is we want to step through, and we'll just do a console.writeLine. CW tab is the quick trick to put that out. List.title. Okay, so now we have some code. And if I was in 2007, I'd write this code and it would just work. I'm going to try the same thing here. I'm going to hold down my control key and hit F5, and I go ahead and I run, and boom, it blows up. And I say, well, what's going on? I close the program and I get this file not found exception. Now, what many of us experience is this one error. And whenever you get this error, it gives you the most misleading error message. So I like to call this the misleading error message error. What you're going to have is you'll be doing something else. It will give you a null reference exception. The problem that we have here, let's go back to properties. And I go to build. By default, Visual Studio has basically given me a target platform of x86. I have to switch that either to x64 or any CPU. So anytime you have an error message and you're creating a console application, the first thing to check is this right here. And once again, it would be great if they gave you an error message saying, you're targeting the wrong platform, but they don't. It always comes back as that misleading message. Now, when I hit Control F5 and we go ahead and run it, well, it's going to go through and it's going to show me all my different lists. Well, there's one thing I want to change here. As I look down and I see all these lists, I additionally see some of the galleries, such as the master page gallery and list template gallery. So let's go ahead and make one more change. And if we come down here and we say if, and we want to make sure that the list is not hidden. If the list is not hidden, then let's go ahead and show that right there. So if the list isn't hidden, go ahead and print it out. And so now we've gone through and we've printed out just the set of lists that I really want the user to see. Okay, so what we learned here is that when we program against Microsoft.SharePoint.dll, we now live in a 64-bit world. Now, just like in 2007, your code that programs against Microsoft.SharePoint.dll always has to run on the front-end web server, which is going to be fine if you're working with a web part or code behind a custom application page or a workflow template. But we can also create console applications mainly just to test object model code in a development environment, because our console applications are running on the front-end web server, as it were. But always remember that we're targeting a 64-bit platform, and you get that weird, the error message that is very misleading if you don't switch it from x86.